to Sonya. Sonya is going to talk to us about creativity in your careers. And I think all of you want to do something creative, and that's why you're all here. But she wanted to talk to you more about what it would entail to be creative in today's world, because things have changed from what it was earlier, right? That's where you're taking us, Sonia.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sonia, please, the other things, introduce yourself on those. uh, yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
We've also
Thanks.
shared your bio with them a couple of times. So, but please do talk
Okay.
about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Cheryl, for inviting me. I am delighted to be here. Also in association with the LSE Alumni Association Mumbai chapter, and my colleagues Amrita Bhatia, Baba, and Sharon Agarwal are also on this call. And we are delighted to be, talking to you and your, mentees today about the transformative power of creativity in business. It's a broader topic than what you might typically expect when, one would say, what is a creative career? And because, as you rightly said, the context has changed, what creativity means today has changed, and what creativity in business today is such a huge exploding topic. So I thought if I gave you guys a context of what that is, and then what that means for how to build those skills and how you can plot your career path, would be a more useful way, to share my experience with you, rather than simply talking about, here are the hottest jobs available to creative talent right now. I wanted to give you that broader context so then you can decide and you can judge for yourselves. So what I'm about to share is really a distillation of the things I've learned in my career journey over the years and still learning. Because in my view, creativity is much broader than what people typically consider the artistic fields. So, for much of the 20th century, you had so-called creative types. You had artists, you had designers, you had copywriters, all relegated to the kids' table, far from serious discussions. Meanwhile, all the important business conversations, used to happen with the grown-ups in the boardroom. And that's no longer the case today. In the business world, creativity manifests itself as innovation. And it really comes into play whenever you have the opportunity to generate new ideas, new solutions, and new approaches. And like I headlined earlier, we're in an era of seismic market shifts, and every business realizes that the key to growth, the key to survival is innovation. So what that means is every discipline within a company, from, let's say, product design to finance to customer service to marketing, people have opportunities to generate and experiment with new solutions. And whether you're an individual, looking to build a career, or you're a company looking to reinvent itself, being creative is a prerequisite today. So I'm going to just pop up my deck. I just have like a few slides which I prepared to kind of give you that context. Yeah. So the key things that I'm going to be talking about are, what is creativity? Okay. What is creativity in action? What do I mean by, when I'm talking about creativity, what is it in action? What does that look like? What kills creativity? What is the profile of a creative thinker? What are the hottest jobs available to creative thinkers right now? And how can you get started? So that's the overview of what I'll be talking about today. And my talk will run for about 30 minutes with plenty of time for Q&A. So if you have any questions, pop them into the chat, and then we'll have a good discussion after I end my talk. Yeah? Okay. So what is creativity? Any idea what you think? What when you say what creativity, what pops into your head? Anyone? You can unmute yourselves, or do you just want me to, continue talking? Okay, no one's answering.
Yeah, I think it's yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's taking things that would not usually be together and putting them together and that usually is a solution that you wouldn't have thought of in the first place.
Okay,
So,
that's good. Anyone else?
We have Anthea saying expression.
Expression.
Creativity is expression. Yes.
Okay, not sure what that means. Okay, so there are a few things coming in. Here are some, common definitions of it. Okay, creativity is an open mind. It's about a growth mindset, not just a fixed mindset. It's about, as you rightly said before, joining the dots where no dots appear to exist. Creativity is asking why or why not or what if. The right question can really open up new avenues of thought and open up an interesting way of looking at a problem. Creativity is the greatest rebellion in existence, because if you look at all throughout history, the greatest scientific breakthroughs, the greatest innovations, inventions, cultural moments have always been when someone challenged the status quo, or somebody dared to ask why or why not, or why can't we do this. And it's also a playful development of breakthrough solutions to real world problems. And then when you look at the application of creativity in business, it is a growth engine. Okay, it's associated with superior performance on both financial and non-financial metrics. So here's a study from McKinsey, and they tracked companies on what they called a creativity score, which is not about advertising or anything like that, but how that translated into organic revenue growth, for instance, or their shareholder returns, or their EBITDA margins. On the one hand, those were the financial metrics that they tracked. But then also, there were metrics like, the ability to hire and retain the best talent, the ability to roll out new products and innovative products and services, the ability to identify, mitigate, and act on risks. Those are the things that make for a really a creative company. And it's that combination of unique, of broad and deep experience, which is really critical for creativity. I was reading this book called The Originals by Adam Grant, and he cited this study by Michigan State University, which looked at Nobel Prize winning scientists from 1905 to 2005, and they compared them with other scientists in that cohort. And they realized that what stood out about Nobel Prize winning scientists was that they all had a creative hobby, and that made them dramatically improve their odds of winning the Nobel Prize, which is really surprising. And then they did similar studies with entrepreneurs and inventors of American businesses, and they realized that the people who started businesses and who contributed to patent applications were much more likely than their peers to have hobbies like music or arts or writing or being into literature or architecture or playing an instrument. And while that reflects, their curiosity and their aptitude towards the arts, it's also the exposure to the arts, serves as a powerful source of creative insight. And yet, even though people know this, businesses know that it's really important to be creative, why do we see so many businesses fail to exploit creativity as they battle with their monsters? I mean, what prevents larger companies from keeping pace with smaller, scrappier startups? And the interesting thing is there's an entrenched prejudice that, the right side of your brain may add a bit of color to life, but it's the left hemisphere that does the serious business. And, that is a prejudice that really needs to be broken, because if you look at the advances that are happening today throughout the business world, it's machine powered or AI powered creativity is already here. AI can already already compose music. It can already create films. It can already create, do much more advanced analytics and all of those things. And it's all going to have an impact on our jobs in the next or it's already happening, but 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And it's faster, it's cheaper, and it's less unreliable than you. So what's your strategy going to be, and how are you going to build your career? So if you think about it, technology can certainly take away the more mundane or repetitive or tedious aspects of our jobs, but it does mean that we need to step up our game or quickly become irrelevant. And that applies whether we are individuals or as companies as well. So if you think about it, is my tongue? Yeah. So what does creativity in action really look like? Does it look like an ad campaign or a sexy brand campaign? I mean, what is it? What does it really look like? And I would say creativity is a practice. It's not just a moment of divine inspiration. Can anyone tell me what this is? This is one of the early sketches of Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper. Okay, very early sketches. And this was the final result. He didn't magically paint the Last Supper. It didn't come out of his brain. He spent years practicing. And all of his interests as a painter, as a draftsman, as an engineer, as a scientist, as a theorist, as a sculptor, as an architect, led him to paint this masterpiece and many others. And that's super interesting because you're drawing on your different interests, on your different experiences, on all of those things to make new connections and find new solutions to whatever it is you're doing. Creativity neatly solves real world problems. This was an early sketch of the computer mouse. And in the mid 1980s, the idea of using a computer mouse to click around instead of, inputting text-based commands was, very, very nascent at that point of time. But Steve Jobs, he saw the potential of it, and he further developed it into something that, you could use on any surface. And it was those developments that kind of led to the PC revolution and, the tablet revolution that we saw further down. But all of these developments happened because somebody recognized that, there was potential in this really nascent thing, but there was so much more that you could do with it. Another thing is that creativity comes when you embrace constraint. I mean, everybody typically thinks that if you have, all the world's best resources, you have access to capital, or you have access to talent, or if you have access to time, you can do great things. But actually, creativity is born when there's constraint. And who doesn't have constraints right now? Whether you're, as an individual or whether you're a company, everybody has constraints. But working within those constraints can help us develop really interesting solutions. So here's an example of a British beer brand that was born without any budget for advertising. And typically beer companies, spend huge amounts of money on TV and, experiential activities. And their budget constraint really forced them to focus on the free but really cluttered digital media. And in order to stand out, they had to do something really dramatic that would, attract people's attention. So then everything that they did on social was to heighten drama in order to attract attention. So they did things like, the founders, vlogging in penguin suits, to actually creating a special edition beer with substances banned from the London Olympics. And those were the kind of things that, get people talking. Because otherwise, if you're simply going to, act within a framework and do things that everybody else is doing, you're not going to stand out. So that constraint of that money constraint helped them think really, really differently. Another thing that we typically take for granted is that creativity questions category conventions and assumptions. And we're seeing this in the business world all the time. So just take like a common example that everybody understands, like Airbnb. Airbnb, disrupted the hotel industry because they let travelers book private spare rooms and entire homes as an alternative to traditional hotels. But it really began when two guys who couldn't pay their rent blew up an air mattress in their living room and charged $80 for the privilege. And then they took that idea and they developed it into a company with $130 billion valuation. That's bigger than, the valuation of the next 3 hotel chains combined. And you're seeing this, everywhere. You're seeing, Uber did the same thing with car rental. Netflix did the same thing with cable TV and the movie business. You're seeing Amazon did it with not just, the retail industry, but it did it with cable TV, publishing, warehousing, logistics, and so many others. And practically every industry are disrupting the category conventions and assumptions on which those industries have been built. And that's really, really exciting. And the last, bit of creativity in action is coming from remixing old ideas in new ways. It's not often that you get, a genuinely unique or breakthrough ideas. All ideas are really built on or remixed from ideas that have come through in the past. So here's an interesting example out of India, actually. Arvind Eye Care Hospital is a hospital chain that delivers mass market, high quality surgery for poor Indians at very affordable rates. But they have something in common with McDonald's. Does anybody know what that is? Okay, so when the founder, conceived of, Arvind Eye Care system, his obsession with efficiency led him to emulate the McDonald's assembly line discipline, their, strict quality norms, their consistency, their standardization, their ruthless cost control, and above all, volume. So here you're seeing a founder apply something from a very different industry and apply it to healthcare to create, a genuinely affordable solution for poor patients. And today, 4.5 lakh eye surgeries are performed by Arvind Eye Care Hospital, making it the largest eye care provider in the world. And that's huge. So this is what I mean by, creativity in action. It's like we have a human advantage that is more powerful, more imaginative than any machine or artificial intelligence system out there. But we have to put it to use, and we have to make those connections and connect those dots and apply those things in creative ways in order to genuinely be able to outcompete machines. So if you think about, what are those creative skills, or what are the things that really kill creativity? Here are the things that, impede it. A lack of confidence. And I'm not talking about overconfidence, but confidence in your ideas, a belief in yourself and your ideas. And that's anxiety is the enemy here. So you need to have a confidence to push your ideas through, even though you might face resistance, people don't really care, people don't understand it. But if you believe it and you can find a way to make it happen. A lack of time. Quite often we say, oh, we can't do this, we can't do that. A lack of time can be a creativity killer. But time also means, the process for coming up with creative solutions gives you time to do that. And it's not, everything rushed, because I think that's also one of the challenges of, of working in today's world. Everybody wants ideas like yesterday. But if the process allows for time for thinking and a time to be generative about coming up with solutions, you can get to better solutions. A lack of stimulus. Think about it. If everybody is reading, the same newspapers, or just flicking through social media all the time, or watching the same movies on Netflix, or not reading the business papers, or not reading outside of their category or industry, how are you going to make connections? How are you going to, connect those dots if you don't develop those interests? Because what tends to happen is, if everybody is reading or watching the same thing, you're going to arrive at solutions that everybody else has already thought of before. So and that's exactly some of the times advertising really makes me laugh is because everybody comes to the same conclusions all the time, because the people working in advertising live in a bubble, and they're come to very similar conclusions most of the time. Isolation, not having a sounding board to think through ideas or poke holes in an argument. That's also one of the demerits. Groupthink. And within organizations, particularly, a deference to the hierarchy or the highest paid person's opinion in the room can really impede creativity, because people are not comfortable enough to voice an opinion or feel safe about voicing an opinion that not everybody else believes in. And brainstorms. How many of you have have had to get into a brainstorm to generate ideas when nobody's spent their time thinking about what could be potential solutions going into that meeting? So if you expect magical solutions to come out of a brainstorm, typically that's not going to happen. So this brings me to, what's the profile of a creative thinker then? How do you build those skills? How do you develop that creative muscle? Listen to your gut, both your heart and your head. I think one of the things that creative people are often, or the artistic creative people are often accused of, is they're being accused of being a little too emotional, a little going with their heart and not thinking through. Build your references. Great artists study great art, or if you want to be a great writer, read great literature. If you want to be a filmmaker, watch great movies, but don't just watch for pleasure. Actually, understand the craft of how things were made, pull things apart. So in order to understand if they got to this result, how did they get there? And when you start pulling things apart, like if you're, let's say, you're interested in filmmaking, how did they set up a shot? How did they edit that scene? How did he brief his talent to emote in the way that they did? How did they edit? What was the kind of cinematography, music, all of those things that kind of make great films possible. So, and that really applies in business as well, because if you aren't reading outside of your industry or looking at smaller players on the periphery and just paying attention to them, pretty soon you'll realize that those small itty-bitty players on the periphery become the mainstream, and then you're left gasping. The thing is to have fun. New connections happen when you're enjoying what you do and enjoying it with people who love what they do as well. See experimentation as play, because it's when you experiment that in an iterative way that you can get to something really, really interesting, as opposed to, okay, here's a brief and here's the solution. I think if you don't enjoy the process of pulling things apart, experimenting with what are the potential solutions that you could really get, picking on the best one, and then building on that, you kind of get you get really stuck, or you get to solutions that have been done before. Also explore, especially since you all are young and you all are students, explore music, explore the unfamiliar, explore culture, explore new behaviors. Human behavior is something that's so rich and so and it can be really applied to so many different ways of doing things. So something simple as psychology is now being applied to user research, or market research, or game theory, or nudge theory. I mean, all of these things are so interconnected, but it's always the science is moving ahead. So always pay attention so that you can absorb and connect those dots again. Push beyond the obvious and make the leap. I think sometimes we're so scared of living in our heads right now that we don't put ourselves out there, we don't voice our opinions, we don't take action on our ideas. We need to do that, put ourselves out there a little more. And okay if you fall, but sometimes making the leap is really the beginning of something really great. when I had to think about, what are the hottest jobs available to creative thinkers right now, to me there were three principles that to me came to be like really important. One was, the jobs that are blending both creative thinking with technology are the ones that are going to be in demand going forward. The second bit is jobs that blend both left brain thinking and right brain thinking. There are some people who think, very clearly with numbers, and there are some people, who think with stories. Can you combine, storytelling with numbers? You get an interesting way of balancing both your left brain and your right brain. Or jobs that blend both broad and deep experience are the jobs that you will also find more fulfilling and going forward. So I put down a few roles that I thought were interesting in the sense of how they are changing. Because when we think about, let's say, a chief marketing officer before, his role earlier used to be about driving sales or growth, through marketing communications. And that's shifted right now, because yes, there are a plethora of digital media, there are pressure on companies as as they're faced with disruption. So the marketing officer's role has also evolved. I think his has become an enterprise profit and loss role, where he's now responsible for driving sales and growth, but through product innovation, through product development, through innovation on the marketing communication side, and not just creating advertising. So even within certain roles or certain industries, the skills requirement is changing, and it's only by keeping ahead of these new requirements can you actually be in demand. So that's also something that I want you to be mindful of. Like, think of my own role before. I used to be a brand strategist for the longest time in advertising for over 10 years. And a brand strategist was responsible for defining a core narrative for a brand or company, and then helping that manifest through communication. So it was very a specialized role, I would say. But increasingly, it's becoming a more of a brand strategy combined with innovation, where once you've defined a core story for a company, how does that lend itself to innovation? For example, how can you build that into new products or services that a company can develop? How can you build that into work culture in terms of hiring and retaining the best talent, or incentivizing people or motivating people better? How do you build that into capabilities, and how do you build that into communication? So even brand strategy has really evolved, and is becoming a much more exciting role than it was before. Being a creative director, I mean, when people think of being a creative director in an ad agency or in a design firm, you're thinking of somebody with a creative vision, and who can bring that creative vision to life through, let's say, print or a TV commercial, or whatever that medium is. But now there's a plethora of media, there's a plethora of platforms, and you want your creative director to actually be conversant with all of that. So his canvas now is that much larger, and people need to be comfortable with these technologies, comfortable with these platforms. But if your background and training has only been in TV and print, you're quickly going to find yourself locked into the old way of doing things and not able to adapt going forward. See also the new roles for product design. I mean, now with most of our lives being spent on on digital, or on our phones and on apps, the role of product designer has taken on new importance, because it's about developing a product from, let's say, start to finish, understanding what the user requirements are, user needs are, thinking through prototypes of how your product could answer those needs, and then building out the final solution. So really it taps into different kinds of skill sets. Yeah, your management skill set, your design skill set, your user interface, user research skill set, and people skills. Simply visual design also has moved beyond graphic design to again, a wide canvas of interfaces, like from websites to apps to games to movies to animation to now even the metaverse, where you're creating immersive worlds. So, people need to need to constantly keep reinventing themselves. Data science is also a really interesting area to go into. It's like storytelling with numbers, where you're creating or you're analyzing, comfortable interpreting really large data sets, but then figuring out, okay, what do you do with that, with those insights that you draw? Where can you apply that? What decisions can you make? Where does that feed into for your other teams to work on? So really, it's becoming the demands on people now are becoming much more much harder, more difficult. So, you really have to keep reinventing yourself throughout your careers. Content creation is also an area where no matter what field you're in, you may be a architect, you may be an illustrator, you may be a designer, but you also have to be a content creator, because people now are building out are on these platforms like YouTube or Instagram or TikTok. They're building out their audience, they're building out their personal brand, they're figuring out ways to monetize their audience and build their businesses. And then last but not the least, founders, people who had enough with working with in a corporate setup, working 9 to 5, have a better idea or better way of doing things, or the next game-changing idea of what's going to change the world, and they go out and build it. So, if you're thinking about, ways to grow in your career or even start your career, read about what's happening in your industry and realize, where the trends are moving in terms of what are the skill sets that companies require or are going to require. Which brings me to my last and final point. I mean, yeah, it's all well for me to say, it's about connecting the dots here where the hottest jobs are, but how do I get started? If I'm a 16-year-old or a 24-year-old who's just graduated from college, what are my next steps going to be? So I have, a few points for you to think about. Like earlier, there was this whole concept of the creative portfolio where, you put all your best work, and it's a showcase for your best work, to potential employers. But what I'd ask you to think about now is more of a career portfolio, where it doesn't matter where you start, or what role you start out with. It's about testing out different things and figuring out what you're really good at. So for me, when I started out, I really didn't have a direction of, where I wanted to build my career in. I thought vaguely, journalism was sounded good, or maybe even consulting. But, the first job I got was actually for an environmental NGO. The second job I got was in political risk consulting. The third job I got was in journalism. So, I kept mixing and matching and, trying out different things to figure out what I liked. And then I made that shift to advertising and then spent the longest time there. So for you, it's important to think of your portfolio as a combination of your skills, your experiences, your talents, things that you're really good at, that you can mix and match and blend in different ways. And don't stop there, because everybody these days needs to think about and keep refreshing and updating their skills. So lifelong learning becomes really, really important to kind of expand your professional opportunities. And then, over a period of time, what you'll find is that the value of your career portfolio grows simply by your ability to cross-pollinate. So you're combining and weaving your skills from different experiences in order to gain new insights, tackle new problems, diversify your income sources, and serve in new ways. So that's really, what I had to share with you today. I hope that's given you something new to think about in terms of what creativity really means in today's context, in today's business context, and then how you can start building your career in that direction. So I'm happy to take your questions. And I'm also, if you want to, if you have a question that you want me to answer privately, you can just send me an email or connect with me on LinkedIn. And I'm happy to, to share my thoughts again further. So over to Cheryl now, or Marianne, who will probably moderate if you guys have any questions for me.
Guys, if you all have any questions, please send it on the chat box. I'll read it out. Or you all can address it directly to Sonya.
Regarding the thing.
Hello,
Yes,
uh,
Sharon.
Errol, your voice is getting cut. I mean, it's breaking. Could you please
Skill
type in
creativity.
your
So I'm
question? Hello,
yeah,
Errol.
okay.
Please could you
Okay,
type in
yeah.
your question? Your voice is breaking.
Sonia, I love what you said, where you're talking about, creating, mixing all the different kinds of uh, skills that you have. I know I was a chemist in a pharmaceutical company, and then we started manufacturing cosmetics, and I find that at the intersection of cosmetics and pharmaceuticals, we found a new area to work in, which we call the cosmeceuticals. And I think what you're saying is right. It's a combination of the different skills uh, that we have, and I think so many of us don't really use them all in our work, but it can help now.
Yeah.
Belon, you have something to say? You wanted to share something? Belon?
Hi, morning.
Belon's in the music industry and you wanted to just share something.
Actually, I'm a sound designer. Nothing to do with music at all, but common mistake worldwide. uh, uh, when we talk about creativity, and I was very happy to be part of this Zoom call because, and this is for all the mentees out there. I've been in the business for 27 years. I am uneducated in the business because at the time when I got into it, there wasn't any uh, film program, audio program across the country. And despite knowing as much as I know over the 27 years, I wanted to attend this to just hear what was being said, spoken about, talked about in terms of creativity, because you need to keep learning. That's the key. That's the key. uh, a lot of what was said actually reaffirms the fact that creativity doesn't have a point when it stops. Sorry, it's very noisy outside. I'm going to just close the window quickly. One second. I hope it's cleaner now. Oh, yeah. Creativity doesn't have a point when it stops. There's never a, okay, now it's over, because that spans across everything you do. It's not limited to the film business, or to sound, or to music for that matter. And that's all the stuff that was spoken about. It also extends, in my experience, to things like product development. And a lot of the softwares that we use depend on many other third-party softwares. For example, plugins that create effects, and people like us end up giving a lot of feedback as product development notes to companies which get used. And you got to keep thinking about what can be better for that product. So one, two, if you don't have experiences in life, like was said, when you're watching a film, just don't watch it because it's a film. But I would say, please watch the film and enjoy it. Hear music, enjoy it. Don't watch it because, oh, now I have to learn something. Oh, I'm reading a book because I need to learn how to write. No, that's not how it works. Please don't do that. It's a moment in time, and I worked in a film called Wake Up Sid, and I call it the Wake Up Sid moment. It's that moment. In other words, we say, I got out of the wrong side of the bed. You get out of the right side of the bed sometimes, and that's that moment when you realize you've climbed a step on that ladder and you've discovered something. So don't make it an effort to, oh, I'm going to listen to rap music and be the best rapper in the world. Please just want to be the best musician in the world. Whatever is that you want to do, be the best writer in the world. But remember this, there's no such thing as best, because in my opinion, best means once. I won the gold medal once. But I've always said this, what happens 27 years later? You want to keep growing right through whatever you're doing. So be aware of your senses and keep absorbing. That's the only key thing I wanted to say to all these kids.
Thanks, Belon. That was an interesting insight. And there is this question that Errol has asked regarding things that kill creativity. What are your thoughts on some actionable steps that can be taken for each one?
Okay. So there were a couple of things I talked about, right? Build your references. So for me, when I started, with building Studio Jigsaw, I had an idea that, I wanted to take brand strategy further and develop it into brand and innovation consulting. And for me, while I had worked in brand strategy for so many years, I felt like I really needed to go back to my fundamentals. So I had to, I read through some of the classics in brand strategy, and then I was also interested in, areas like design thinking and innovation strategy and new frameworks that are coming up around those areas. And so I started, building on and expanding around my skill set. And that in that whole process of doing that helped me make new connections, of how I could take this practice forward and build out this discipline for my company. And so I literally spent about a year and a half just studying, reading, making my notes, building out my frameworks, and building out processes and sprints that I could apply for clients. And that whole process was really a journey in discovery, because I had taken the time out of my regular day to read, to think, to apply. And I would never have been able to do this if I was working in a 9-to-5 job, because there are all kinds of distractions there, and it drowns out sometimes it drowns out your gut instinct sometimes. Because even though deep down, when I was working in advertising for the longest time, I knew that I wanted to start something of my own at some point. But it was really the birth of my child and that whole maternity leave that made me think differently about what I wanted out of life, what I wanted to do, how I would be able to manage both work and my daughter. And that made me think differently. And so that was then I said, okay, I'm going to chuck that. I'm going to, leave my job, and I'm going to focus on building Studio Jigsaw. And then that was the journey that I took. I literally, made a leap from, my career in my earlier job to starting out something new. So that was that moment. And then each step I took was really helping me build out, my sprints, or build out my brand, or build out outreach to clients. And each step was baby steps. You don't build a company in a day, a week, a year. You're thinking long term. You're thinking like 15, 20, 25 years down the line. But really, it's every day is that journey of making those steps to make that dream come alive. So I would say expand your world, keep your reference set open, make those connections, drown out the noise, and yeah, just take that first step, because that's probably the hardest thing to do, taking that first step. What's my story to founding Studio Jigsaw? I thought I covered that just now.
Sonia, I have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, hi. So basically, I mean, for everyone who doesn't know out here, I'm an angel investor, and I'm also the founder of a wellness brand and also a mentor for startups. And so I've more or less seen all sides of this startup ecosystem. And I know you mentioned about how growth is so, that for growth, the key is innovation. And my main question out here is that in order to innovate, there are many costs involved. And so for somebody who's working on a startup, starting from scratch, how would they be able to cover these costs? Because I know as an investor, I would not give anybody any money unless I see a proof of concept or I see any previous revenues. So how do you gain that confidence and manage to actually bootstrap your own company if you don't have the money?
So that's a good question, because I am bootstrapping my company, right? When I started with a clear story of what I wanted to do. So for me, Studio Jigsaw is a brand strategy and innovation consultancy, where we define a core story and build it into new products, services, experiences, and communications, because we want to help our clients invent and reinvent themselves. So that was the story of my company. And I keep harping on that, at every opportunity when I, meet with prospective clients, or when I'm, sharing new ideas on social media. Like, I keep bringing it back to that, because I think for a startup, the only thing that you have is a clear story and a clear vision of what you do. And you need people to buy into that vision, whether that is, people that you want to hire or bring on board as employees, whether that's your prospects or prospective clients or prospective customers or partners and suppliers. They need to buy into what you're trying to do in the first place. And these things don't cost money. Okay, these things are about vision, and these things are about your ability to execute on that vision. And the idea of spending on marketing and developing product, it doesn't have to be expensive. Okay, it's about what is your core story, what are you trying to do, how are you going to do it, do you have have you been able to create some kind of traction for that concept, and then building from there. I mean, they're all baby steps, but I think so much in the startup world is about how do we raise funds immediately or overnight, and to be able to scale up growth to 10x, 15x, 20x. And there's this hyper growth story that is not really that's, I think, counterproductive to founders, because they have not really defined their core story. They may not necessarily have proof of concept. They may not necessarily have built in the insights, or from prospective clients or people who may be doubters, and answer those questions soundly. So sometimes give yourself that time to think these things through, because this is foundational. This is really, really important for a startup, and this is the layer that that actually is the most important thing. But many startup founders or many people starting businesses kind of forget, because once you get momentum, or once you scale up, or once you get growth, if you aren't clear on why you started, you end up making really costly mistakes.
There's another question for you, Sonya. How much from Errol again, how much importance should you give to formal education degrees in the creative space? How do you choose a major that stands the test of time, since change is constant?
Okay, that's really interesting. I always value education and the importance of a good education. like I was fortunate to study at the London School of Economics, and that experience really taught me a few things. One was critical thinking skills, being able to articulate an argument, communicate effectively. These were the basics that, stand the test of time. But my degree was in history of international relations, which, doesn't really guarantee you instant success, in the sense that it opens many doors for you, but they are doors. Okay, so it opened my world to, consulting, to journalism, to advertising, to, I could also possibly have worked for, a non-governmental organization like the United Nations. It's possible I could have done all of those things, but those are just doors. And at some point, you learn on the job, and then you have to keep building your skills from there. So while I think education is important, you can't rest on it, or you can't say, oh, I'm from IIT or IIM, and I've reached it in the world. What have you done with your degree? What have you done with your education? How are you learning? How are you staying fresh? That's really important. I think there's no education or foundational education that stands the test of time. We have to keep learning through the course of our careers, keep reinventing ourselves through the course of our careers, because what you learned in school or college or at a graduate or master's level has a very short shelf life.
So now I just want to pick up on the point that Errol mentioned about change being constant. How do you know that your business needs to pivot when, in terms of innovation? How do you know that you need to change and you need to pivot if something is not working? Rather than, looking at the J curve and saying that, okay, no, I'm still going to hit that bottom and start going up.
So it's really about, going back to the first point that I made about staying open. I think, keeping our radar open for, what's happening in the world, what's happening more broadly, rather than, just in your particular competitive set. I think sometimes we may be blindsided because we're so focused on, our vision and, what we think is right for our business, but we're ignoring, what's happening around it and not staying open to the changes that could potentially impact us. So, having that fixed versus open mindset is really important, because it's also, for a founder, having that team around you that's able to flag things early, that's able to say, what, here's what we need to do, here's why this is important, rather than founders or CEOs living in that ivory tower where you only buy into the opinion of key people around you and ignore what's bubbling up from the bottom. So it's really a combination of things. It's very difficult to say when you need to pivot or how you need to pivot, but that openness and that being able to share things early and often, and is key to at least being able to take the right calls and saying, being open to change as opposed to being really fixed.
Thanks.
Beverly, I think Beverly has a question. Sorry, Sharan, you wanted another question to say something? Beverly?
Hello.
Yeah.
So I'm currently studying product and industrial design, and I'm in my second year. One thing I'm seeing a lot, like especially when I'm working on assignments and even a few internship projects, is that it's a lot of critique, obviously, and it does take a toll on your project and your mindset. How do you deal with that? How do you incorporate your clients' needs and their vision while still being true to your style as a designer or your style as any creative thinker?
I think for any creative thinker, it's about having your process, that your own process of how you work, that clients or people you partner with buy into, so that everyone is clear about how this is going to work from day one and how they input into that process and how decisions are going to be made and how you're going to evaluate those decisions. because I think having worked in advertising, what I used to find very demoralizing and demotivating was, especially for creative talent, I mean, as a strategist, you're a little more immune, but creative talent would work on a campaign really hard. They'd be put their heart and soul into it, and then it would be killed off by people above, or the client the next day, simply because people could, but also because they didn't input into the process early on. So why are you fleshing out creative work to the fullest extent when you're critiquing, and feedback systems could have been put in place early, and when a creative person or anybody or a designer working on it could have taken that on board at an early stage of the project, rather than right at the end when it's fully designed or ready to go.
And how would you how do you like deal with that kind of treatment? How do you deal with that kind of situation?
So when I was building out Studio Jigsaw, I talked about building out my sprints, where there's a clear process of how we work, and the way we work is very closely with the client, where there's a clear process, there's a clear output that's supposed to be, that comes out of the process, and we workshop the solutions together. So there's time for ideation, there's time for research, there's time for thinking through the issues, and then there's time for prototyping and getting to the final solution. So it's like a staggered stage gate approach. So there's feedback and input at different sets at different stages of the project, as opposed to a client briefing you at the very beginning and then only seeing the work at the very end. There is a feedback mechanism at different points of the sprint.
Thank you so much.
I think what you're saying, Sonia, here is also to have your ideas or your process in place. So
Yeah.
you get all the inputs right in the beginning.
Yeah.
Sometimes
and the clients buy into the final output because they've had a chance to think things through from the very beginning. Because quite often what happens is you don't even ask their feedback or their opinion, or the issues that they're facing early on in the project. You don't understand it. You've developed what you think is a solution, and you go back and say, okay, here's why you need to buy it, and they're like, no way, you don't understand it, and then it's going to be shot down.
Thank you so much.
Anthea has a question. Anthea?
Hi, Sonia. I just wanted to know, I'm very curious about this. Has there ever been an experience or an instance wherein a creativity killer has probably ignited, say, a creative spark, or has helped you in any way to achieve a goal, say, with a creative project, or just anything that you probably were working on and it led to something positive?
No. Short answer, no. Creativity killers really kill your spirit more than anything, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Beverly, do you have another question?
No, sorry.
Okay. Anybody else? I think that was interesting. And I think what a lot of our young people will have to learn is to, work with the creativity killers and find ways to handle that and to become more confident and be able to say what they want to say and do what they have to do. I think.
Yeah, I think also, the conditions within organizations need to be created for creativity to thrive. I think it's not fair to say that it's all about, you can't put the onus only on individuals, right? The culture within an organization needs to support free thinking, needs to support people being able to voice what they're thinking, what they believe in. It needs to support collaboration. It needs to support so many things, rather than the hierarchical approach, rather than open approach. Those things are really important. And I think even for young people, the right organization, working in the right organization, or choosing which organization you want to work with, can actually be a huge confidence booster in terms of believing in themselves and believing in their ideas and boosting their skill sets. Because sometimes I think you're seeing a lot of people, young people these days, facing burnout, facing, mental health issues. Is because, organizations themselves are just driving people so hard to, okay, we need to achieve this, but not lending time for people to really create those conditions for people to thrive. So I think that's also an important thing for organizations, to bring out the best in people, that they also need to keep these things in mind. It's not fair to put it all on, people themselves.
Now, how did you deal with the anxiety issues that you must have had? I think all of us go through those creativity killers.
Is that the only takeout from this? No, okay.
It's not the only.
Okay. See, sometimes stepping outside of your job, having time to think more broadly, you're able to navigate better. I think, we need to step off the treadmill from time to time and take a step back and think about, okay, what am I really good at? What do I really want to build? What do I really want to do, let's say 5 years from now? And what do I need to learn, or who do I need to work with, or what kind of industry experience do I need in order to get to that point? I think we constantly need to step back and reevaluate, and then take action. Because if we don't do that, we'll find that, we spend way too long within an organization, get really set in our ways, and then find that, the world has moved on far beyond us, and then we can't change gears.
Does anybody have anything else to ask? Sonya? I hope, Sonya, that you have, that all of our mentees who have attended have a better idea of what they need to keep doing and how they need to look at their future careers looking from here, as to, getting their creative juices going, and how do they do things from here. Yeah, there's someone else. Okay. Anthea says that the reason why creativity killers is so interesting is because the pandemic has reinforced these killers even more than they used to exist.
Yeah.
So, thank you so much, Sonya. I don't think anybody else is asking any other questions. And thank you so much for raising. If anybody needs any questions or anything, please do get to,
you can reach out to me on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn,
or email.
And talk to Sonya, and I'd be willing to help you, right?
Yeah, it was my pleasure to participate, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Sharon. Bye.
And bye, Sharon.
Bye.
Bye.